every single thing, whether it was the acquisition of paper clips, light bulbs, furniture, mattresses, you name it, right? Alan Weisselberg's kids' payments, rents, everything would have a Donald signature on it or his initial. You know the expression, right? The cat has 9 lives. I think his 9 lives have expired because the documentary evidence that's in the hands of the prosecutors is so significant and it's so spot on that there's no way anybody's getting out of it.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. Potential trouble ahead for the ex-president. The man who ran his campaign and won the presidency, in part by touting his business acumen, is now seeing that business and its chief financial officer indicted. Indictments for the Trump Organization and the former guy's top money man, Alan Weisselberg, coming down today from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, unsealed just this afternoon. From that indictment, quote, the defendants and others devised and operated a scheme to defraud federal, New York State, and New York City tax authorities since 2005. The indictment alleges Weisselberg avoided paying taxes on $1.7 million in income. He faces criminal charges, including grand larceny and tax fraud. Weisselberg and the Trump Organization, through an attorney, pleaded not guilty. In a Trumpian-style statement, the organization said the Manhattan DA is using Weisselberg, quote, as a pawn in a scorched earth attempt to harm the former president, who recently put out a short statement of his own, calling the indictment a political witch hunt by radical left Democrats. The twice impeached one-term ex-president has already been the target of 2 lawsuits by the New York Attorney General's office, who is working in connection with the Manhattan DA in this current criminal investigation. Back in 2016, Trump paid a $25 million settlement after he was sued for defrauding students of Trump University. And his foundation was shut down in 2018 after it was found to have a, quote, shocking pattern of illegality. The New York AG at the time, Barbara Underwood, said it was functioning as little more than a checkbook to serve Trump's business and political interests. Although today's charges are against the organization and Alan Weisselberg, they don't necessarily mean that the ex-president is in the clear. As the New York Times reports today, quote, now that he faces charges, Weisselberg, who is 73 years old, still could cooperate with the prosecutors. If he ultimately pleads guilty and strikes a deal, he could do considerable damage to Trump, who for decades has depended on his unflinching loyalty, once declaring with 100% certainty that Weisselberg had not betrayed him. Potential legal jeopardy for the former president is where we start this hour. Joining us now is Michael Bromwich, former Inspector General for the Justice Department. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I want to show you something Congressman Schiff said and see if it's a sentiment with which you agree.
It's relatively easy to make a case against a corporation, but to be able to follow that criminal liability to the very top, you need people inside cooperating. That's, again, why Weisselberg is so important. But everything about Donald Trump's life, everything about his everyday in office spells corruption. So none of this is surprising. It's just the same kind of grift in private practice that he imported to the White House.
Do you agree with the congressman's description of basically the way the ex-president operated?
Yes, I do. I think what we've seen in this indictment is consistent with the way that we've seen that Trump operated his business and operated in the White House. So I don't find the indictment surprising, and I certainly don't find what Congressman Schiff said surprising.
People are, I think, who have watched him evade accountability from the law, either through the Mueller probe or through the campaign finance investigation that the Southern District undertook that sent Michael Cohen to jail. The ex-president became an unindicted or individual number 1. Through instance after instance, 2 impeachments, have felt that the ex-president constantly evades accountability. What are your thoughts about his company, where he devises, more than an income, but it is his brand, it is sort of his reason for being charged criminally? Is that enough in your view?
Well, it's a bad day for Donald Trump. I mean, he is completely identified with the Trump Organization. It's the brand that he built. It's the company he's proud of. He spent his entire professional life in that company. So it's devastating to him and to his brand to be indicted in this way, and to have his chief financial officer, one of his top aides, charged with not only scheme to defraud, but conspiracy, filing false documents, changing records of the companies. It all speaks very poorly for the Trump organization and the way it was run.
And we're just, in these sort of 6 months of his post-presidency, getting our fullest window into the way his company operated. We're also getting our fullest window into the effect he had over the executive branch in the form of a lot of investigative journalism and some good work by the House Judiciary Committee. And I wonder if I can get your thoughts on some of the sort of slow-moving scandals that Trump's public calls to investigate and prosecute enemies like the New York Times and CNN and the Washington Post and Congressman Adam Schiff were, for one way or another, appear to have been heeded. What do you think the Justice Department needs to do to make sure that either, one, that wasn't the case, or two, it never happens again?
Well, I think the Justice Department has a heavy burden to launch those investigations that have merit. Not to bend to political pressure to conduct investigations that don't have merit, but not to shy away from conducting investigations that really do go to the heart of how our system is supposed to operate. And so I think that it's some very difficult decisions that the Justice Department is going to be facing about which of the investigations to pursue and how extensively to pursue them. But I think there's a real risk in simply trying to put things in our rearview mirror and saying, let's look forward and not look back. Accountability is an incredibly central principle of our government. It was largely ignored for the last 4 years, and we need to reclaim it in part through the responsible conduct of these investigations.
Well, you are an expert in a league of your own in this category. I mean, one of the only inspectors general that Donald Trump liked, I believe he put out a statement praising him this week, Mr. Horowitz, is the man who will do all of the investigations. So far, the current Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General have not tapped anyone other than Mr. Horowitz. Is that the right way to understand the depth and the lengths and who was involved in what was clearly the politicization of the pardon process, of criminal sentencing, of domestic spying?
Well, I think the IG's office in DOJ is the right entity to conduct these investigations. I think there's obviously a lot on Mr. Horowitz's plate, but these are really important investigations to conduct. It's a little surprising that over the last 4 years, there have been relatively few investigations done by the DOJ IG of activities during the Trump administration. So I think it's high time for those to proceed and to come to a prompt conclusion.
When you see the appointment of a select committee to commence the first investigation into what was behind the attacks of January 6th, do you feel optimistic that that will be an investigation that is a true fact-finding mission? And we can get to whether or not the Trump side of America will believe it. But just on the investigation itself, do you have confidence that they'll get to the bottom of what happened that day?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think it's an incredibly important investigation to be done. I think it's really a disgrace that we don't have a bipartisan commission, as the Democrats in the House and the Senate had proposed. I think that imprimatur on the investigation was very important, but I think members of the Republican Party deliberately withheld it in order to deprive any such investigation of credibility. I think that Speaker Pelosi and the members of this select committee need to be very careful to conduct this investigation right down the middle, very responsibly, and in a bipartisan way, even though it's not really a bipartisan panel. And I think if it does that, it calls witnesses to testify publicly. It puts out a compelling report. I think that will have value and is very important for us.
Here is hoping. Michael Bromwich, thank you so much for spending some time with us on a day like today and talking about all the day's headlines. We're grateful. Joining our conversation now, some of our favorite reporters and friends. Ashley Parker, Washington Post White House bureau chief, joins us. Also joining us, Mike Schmidt, New York Times Washington correspondent. And our friend Jason Johnson's here, politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University and contributor to The Griot. Lucky for us, all three MSNBC contributors. Ashley Parker, you could put the beginning of this anywhere from we'll have all the best people to the ex-president flying his Trump helicopter around the Iowa State Fair, I think in 2015. His company is him, he is his company, and keeping his company's financial records became one of the central missions of the White House and the entire cabinet over the last 4 years. What do you think is really going on today behind closed doors for the ex-president?
Well, the president or the former president and his family, of course, are incredibly worried. When he was president, as he was facing any number of investigations and probes and impeachments, there was always this talk that he sort of had two red lines. One was his family and one was his business. And obviously, today's news touches on both of them in an incredibly devastating way for the former president and potentially his entire family.
Mike Schmidt, the red line is something that you and your colleagues actually asked the ex-president about in an interview. I want to play that audio. We'll talk about it on the other side.
If Mueller was looking at your finances or your family's finances unrelated to Russia, is that a red line?
Would that be a breach of what his actual
I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes, Tom.
But if he was outside that lane, would that mean he'd have to go?
Would you
No, I think that's a violation. Look, this is about Russia.
But what would you do?
I can't answer that question because I don't think it's going to happen.
I guess at this point, there's some irony in the fact that he was fine with Mueller looking at Russia and not his businesses. But this was something that he fought. He used Mnuchin at Treasury to help keep his taxes from Congress. He used all the levers of government to shield any transparency into his financial records. Cy Vance and the state attorney general's office had all that. Today, they charged his company as being a criminal enterprise. Do you think that they have everything he was trying to keep secret? And do you think there's more to come?
I don't know, but I think what we see today and what you saw in that audio that you just played has maybe been the president's biggest exposure from the beginning. And that was, could his life sustain the exposure of running for president and becoming president? And in many ways, you know, we knew more about Donald Trump than any other candidate when the 2016 election happened. His life had been exposed in all sorts of manners, and people had made their judgments about him. But the other part, besides the public, attention that he would receive, would be criminally. When you become a high-profile person like the president of the United States, everything that you do gets examined, and it's put through that dense lens of the law. And I often wondered, would his life be able to survive that look? Would it be able to do that? And as president, he was able to survive all of that. I think a lot of that had to do with the simple fact that he was the president, and that gave him an enormous amount of power and made him very difficult to investigate. But that is no longer. And today he is confronting the realities of his life being examined, and he does not have the powers of the presidency. And he may be in the most weak position that we've seen him in.
Yeah, I mean, Jason, to Mike's point, these are the entities, to take Mike's analogy a little further, when he popped his head up, these are all of the sort of entities and associations that got a closer look, perhaps. Trump University, I think half a dozen people with his 2016 campaign were charged and pleaded, from Manafort to Gates to you can go on and on. The inaugural committee was charged for misusing funds. That investigation is ongoing. His foundation was shut down. His business was indicted today. I remember someone saying to me when Michael Cohen was first out there talking about Stormy Daniels that this was the thing that would take him down, that it was such a sloppy sort of hush money operation that it wouldn't have been collusion with Russia. It would have been something about the almost mob-like way he conducted himself. What do you make of the company that bears his name, that is really just a branding entity, slaps his name on stuff, being charged criminally today?
Well, Nicole, this is the thing. For a long time, because of his celebrity and TV and tabloids and everything else like that, Trump could sort of do that thing from the Naked Gun. Nothing to see here, Frank Drebin, as there's like explosions and fireworks and everything in the background. Like, he could just distract people. What we're seeing now, is this was going to happen anyway. He sped up the process by running for president. Like, at some point, somebody would have started to say, wait a minute, this is just too messy and it doesn't make any sense. But his arrogance, this is why mobsters don't want to be on the cover of Time magazine. This is why Tony Soprano told everybody else, hey, stay off the TV, Christopher. Like that, because once you get this level of exposure, people are going to start digging into your background. And this is where I think this could potentially go. One, I think this hopefully it discourages any other multi-billionaires or wannabe multi-billionaires for running for president, because they don't want anyone looking into their finances. But what it also does potentially is open up the doors for all the other investigations for where this money has gone. Because we know some of it's gone to him, but we have no idea how many other foreign governments or organizations or other members of the Republican Party that this money could have been shifted to. And now we could begin to find out just how many tentacles this octopus has. So it's damaging for Trump. I still don't think he'll ever end up seeing, an orange jumpsuit or a jail, but it could lead to a chilling effect on other people who have worked with him and tried to cover his behavior for, who knows, 4 years, if not 20.
Well, and actually, that is sort of the enduring image of the Trump story, right? I mean, journalists who cover the ex-president, have to consider whether they can go visit some of their sources in jail. I mean, Michael Cohen now does our TV show, and others. And I mean, all of the people around the ex-president seem to have committed crimes in service of him, or to have been willing during the last 4 years to do so. And there's been a debate raging on this show and others among our legal experts. Dan Goldman feels like if this was all they had, then this is less than what people thought they might be pursuing in terms of charges. Folks like Andrew Weissman thinks this is described it as the tip of the iceberg. Let me read you a statement from New York's Attorney General Letitia James. She says this: today is an important marker in the ongoing criminal investigation of the Trump Organization and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. In the indictment, we allege, among other things, financial wrongdoing, whereby the Trump Organization engaged in a scheme with Weisselberg to avoid paying taxes on certain compensation. This investigation will continue, and we will follow the facts and the law wherever they may lead. What does your reporting suggest in terms of where we are with this probe, beginning, middle, or end?
Well, I think the sort of important thing to keep in mind that someone close to the president was making to me yesterday is that in terms of this probe, the former president created a culture, right? He created a culture where just about everyone who touched him or entered his bubble emerged in some way singed or tarnished or under criminal indictment. There was a spectrum there, but it almost never ended well. And there were specific instances of the president directly asking people to do things he knew were inappropriate, like fire Comey. That's one example. But then there was this culture where even if the president did not specifically ask someone, the former president did not specifically ask someone to do it, he had people around him who were yes men and enablers and were desperately trying to anticipate what he wanted and do his bidding in advance. And so when you read these stories and you begin to report more on Weisselberg, he is someone who became so valued in the Trump Organization, not only because he explicitly did what Donald Trump wanted him to do, but because in many cases he anticipated what the president would want or his boss would want, and did it in advance of him asking. So when we look at these charges, that there's a world in which he is doing these things because he knows Trump as a boss is not going to want to have to pay his organization to have to pay taxes. He is going to want the value of his organization inflated when he needs to borrow money, and then deflated artificially when he wants to claim he owns no taxes. And in that manner, I think you could see a lot more of these people in the president's orbit exhibiting similar behavior and thus getting in trouble for it.
Well, and I guess that is actually the sort of enduring legacy. And Mike, you covered how he imported that model into the White House and all of the havoc that caused his war against the Justice Department. We're learning more about it now, its impact on the Pentagon. If you pull that thread forward, we now know exactly how he ran his business, thanks in part to today's indictment. We know a lot more about how he ran the White House, and Ashley mentioned firing Jim Comey. We're learning more and more about how he sought to politicize his own Justice Department. He's at it again. I mean, he's just reemerged politically for his whatever second act. What do we understand now to be Kevin McCarthy's role and Mitch McConnell's role, not just in enabling it, but in saying, yeah, I'm for that. I'm for that model of criminality and law breaking and norm busting?
Well, it will put them in an unusual, another difficult spot where they're going to have to make sort of a determination about their public posture on this. And they've struggled with that mightily since the insurrection. But I think on a sort of a larger point about today that I was sort of thinking about is that this is the latest person to come up to bat in the battle against Donald Trump. We have watched as a slew of different people came up and Donald Trump's opposers put their faith in them. Jim Comey, when he announces his investigation into Trump's campaign's ties to Russia publicly in 2017. Next was Robert Mueller. Mueller was going to get Trump. Then it was going to be Congress. And then it was going to be Congress again, with the Republicans flipping to help the Democrats put an end to Trump and making it so he could never run again. That didn't happen. So now, then it was going to be Georgia state crimes. And here we are with a tax case, with the beginnings of a tax case on his CFO. It's the latest thing for us to see. Maybe it's going to be successful, maybe it's not. But everything up until this point has struggled to hold him accountable. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was the president and the powers that came with it. But nevertheless, he has continued to evade things his entire life. And this is the next battle on that front.
Ashley Parker, Mike Schmidt, Jason Johnson, thank you so much for starting us off this hour on another remarkable day.